Hi, this is Paul, and I think it's about a year since I found Jordan Peterson on YouTube and started listening to him. And the reason for that is because I think my first blog post when I found his biblical series to try and record some of this stuff was on June 19, and it was probably about a month before then that I found him. So thought it's a good time to just pause and take stock of maybe some of the things I've learned in this year. Probably number one, the Bible endures. The thing that grabbed my attention right away was that Jordan Peterson was giving a series of talks in a lecture hall where people paid to attend, and he was selling it out. And I listened to what he was saying, and on one hand, it was like nothing I'd ever heard before in terms of discussing the Bible. On the other hand, he didn't he wasn't a biblical expert in terms of the kind of people who write these kind of books behind me. And that really grabbed my attention. And probably over the course of a year, I guess I've probably been more open and, in fact, even more convinced of the doctrine of basically biblical inspiration, that the Bible is so enduring that it's people who otherwise would not have any ideas about inspiration or anything like this are finding meaning and guidance in it like they haven't before. That's a dramatic thing. They might not be reading the Bible like the Bible is being read, let's say in conservative or evangelical churches, but the Bible is being read and people are drawing guidance from it and trying to learn about it. And here's a nasty little note. I have a bunch of these commentaries, which is the Ancient Christian Commentary on Scriptures, which is a modern compilation of ancient sermons, and they didn't really have commentaries, but basically ancient writing about the Bible. Part of what I've always enjoyed is studying the history of interpretation. And so here's a nasty little note to all the literalists out there. Christians have been reading the Bible for 2,000 years and often coming up with very different conclusions. Now, I know this is a point that's often made by skeptics, and to me, I don't find that to actually be an argument against the utility of the Bible. I find that to be an argument for the endurance of the Bible and the God-breathedness of the Bible. The fact that you can take this Bible into radically different cultures and times, and people all around the world and throughout history pick it up and say, I think this should guide me, says something about the book that I think endures and is important. And so seeing Jordan Peterson saying to me in my interview with him, I'm really committed to the biblical series. I really want to keep doing that. And his idea that he's going to go through the entire Bible this way, well, even if he manages to do that, he would probably at the end of it want to do it again. And for me as a preacher who preaches about the Bible all the time, there's a little bit of vindication in that, because I have had the experience, as have many others I know, that when you work with the Bible, you find you cannot reach the bottom. It just keeps giving. Now you might say, well, that's confusion, or that's been my experience. And I wouldn't be surprised if Jordan Peterson goes, if he could manage to get all the way through it, and I really don't know how he would, but if he could manage to get all the way through it, he'd probably want to start again, because you start reading the end and it connects you all the way through. So the Bible endures. Point 2, secularization is looking more like a hallway than a closet. Sometimes people ask me, well, why are you studying this guy so much? Why are you talking about him? What's the deal with your man crush? When I find people who are being bread pilled, and again, I talked about this in a couple of my last videos, people in the meetup. Part of why I love doing these meetups, and I've got to tell you, if you're in the Sacramento area and you're not coming to any of these meetups, you're really missing out, because we are actually, I don't want too many of you to come because it works nice with not too big of a group, but we're having a great time, and we're having conversations that flow all over the place, and it's awesome. So, but secularization is looking more like a hallway than a closet. And that means that whereas, I'd say probably before this, I had really, well, I have always known people who have desecularized and become Christians. They did it in a way that broke the narrative of Western civilization and in a sense reverted. And what I think we're seeing is people are going through, not simply back. Now, going through means somewhat going back, but it's, going through means you're moving forward. You're moving forward in this, and you're taking it with you. So it's post enlightenment, but it's not simply what was there before. The lostness, point 3, the lostness of options. Pluralism and affluence is yielding its own brand of lostness. Most people that I heard of, I think, would assert that having more options and more money is always better. And I think we're getting to the point as a society where we're realizing that more power and more money is not always better. In fact, it yields its own kind of lostness. This was on the Babylon Bee today. I'm bored, says a kid with more luxuries than even royalty possessed just 100 years ago. And I love the kid that has blue hair. Matches my shirt. This is something that we're learning. I think we so often believe that with more time and more power, we can fix the world. And I think what we're seeing is that, nope, it's not a function of money. It's not a function of power. You give someone all the money in the world, and they can be just as lost. In fact, they can be more powerfully lost than ever. And if you don't believe me, go ahead and read the blogs of people who win the lottery. Those who were lost before are usually lost after. And those who had their stuff together before usually did okay. So what's the difference? We don't have the answers. Every now and then I check in on the sorting myself out guy, and the video I saw today of why I'm not a Christian. I was fascinated by this video, partly because, he's in Tonga, and there's a Tongan congregation that is using our facilities for their public worship. And I've been interested in them as a people because they're an example again of a traditional people taking the immigrant journey to the United States. And it's interesting that immigrant journey doesn't always turn out as most immigrants would imagine. They certainly come here for the financial opportunities and the educational opportunities and the opportunities to get into the world, but they very quickly begin to realize what they've lost. And so he's in a sense going back from Canada to Tonga, and he's taking the benefits from not being here, places where there isn't an internet, places where the food is grown organically on small farms. I would imagine he has an easier time keeping his life together, even as a stranger in Tonga, than he ever would in North America, because all of the things that we imagine will bring us life are not there. Yet at the same time, when he's talking about his spiritual journey, the lostness of options and affluence seems to bear witness to it. Should he be Buddhist? Should he be a skeptic? Should he be a Christian? How do you answer that question unless you're deeply embedded into something? And I think this is part of the reason why a lot of the bread pilling that Jordan Peterson is doing is in the direction of very rigorous traditional religions that ask a tremendous amount of its adherents. As I mentioned before, as Jonathan Peugeot mentioned before in his talk with James Fox Higgins, if you If you want to become part of the Orthodox Church, this is not like becoming part of an evangelical church where you can walk in and be baptized and, oop, here you are. They are going to make demands on you, and these demands are going to cripple your lifestyle, probably in some very crucial ways. And so in all likelihood, the only people that are going to go into this are those who realize they can't live life any other way. I've seen this in the black community with Pentecostal and very conservative and demanding black congregations. You are going to be there, and there is going to be social pressure on you. And in a sense, in the Christian Reformed Church, part of what we've seen in the last 80 years has been the dismantling of all of that rigorous apparatus. And we threw it off often in the name of getting rid of legalism and provincialism, but I've been having a vigorous conversation today on Twitter with my friend Eric Dirksen, who pastors our daughter church in Davis, talking about why there are no longer Ascension Day services. Well, we've lost touch and we've lost track. And here's the question: can you option and choice your way back into this? Well, not unless you give up options and choices. And there's your dilemma. And I remember I remember when I was in Calvin Seminary, a radical missionary named Viv Grigg came to the school, and I was just amazed by his presentation. He, gave up everything and lived amongst the poor in the Philippines. But what didn't he give up? He didn't give up his passport. He didn't give up his options. And so when I think about the incarnation of Jesus, Jesus, you might say, well, the only out was death. Yeah. And so there's a lostness to affluence and options that I think we are getting in touch with. And, this guy, for me, kind of shows some of this dynamic. I think of the song by U2, we, still haven't found what we're looking for. Now I think there's something beyond postmodernity. And I think we're seeing that in Peterson, where he's in his conversations with Shapiro and Delahunty and Sam Adams, what he's really digging into is reality a space of objects or a forum for action and a forum for consciousness? That's a really important conversation, and it's one that I hadn't really thought a lot of a year ago, but it's weighing heavily on my mind now in terms of the question, what is a human being? And when I look at the shape of Christian apologetics, Christianity is very much, looked at reality in a sense. I shouldn't say that. In our culture, we have looked at Christianity as a space for objects, and how can I say this? The orientation of our theological vision has followed this orientation, and Peterson is shaking that up. And this is where Peterson looks in at the materialist seeing objects and calls that world Newtonian, and he says that that's not how we act. And so this is pragmatism, coming to fruition and saying we act in ways that betray our philosophical confessions and stated beliefs. What does that tell us? Well, again, looking at it from the perspective of a depth psychologist, you would have to say, well, if my conscious self is only this tiny part and the rest of me knows better, and the rest of me does know better, I can't stop myself from breathing. If something is flying at my head, I react. My brain is smarter than my conscious self in many ways. And so the relationship between consciousness and being is not a simple one. And, we can thank the depth psychologists for this. We can also thank them for a lot of additional complexity in this. And so looking back on modernity, the modern quest for control remade everything. And this had everything to do with, I haven't read Jonah Goldberg's book yet, but I've read some things about it. Ben Shapiro mentioned it. and I'm thinking about this in line with C.S. Lewis's Miracles. We have colonized and pushed back our old adversary nature like never before. And if you read Yuval Harari's book, he talks about plague on, let's see, hunger, plague, and war. Well, part of the reason probably we've backed off of war is because it's gotten to the point that it is, unless it's fought in a limited way, it is too costly and catastrophic to use. And so we've backed off war, and via science and technology, we've greatly reduced hunger and plague. We have longer life expectancies. We have not eliminated death. And even if we could somehow eliminate biological death, at some point we might ask, should we, given the rise in suicide rates? We have eliminated hunger, but, and now I mean that the sensation of hunger, have we improved feeding? And at what expense have we done these things? And because we've done this to the point of endangering ourselves, and now all you have to do is walk through Costco or your supermarket, and you see the rise of the natural and organic. In other words, we've nearly killed Mother Nature, and we've got her to the point that she's almost on life support, and we're starting to worry that, oh, maybe we shouldn't have pushed Mom so hard because we're awfully dependent on her. And we're awfully dependent on her in ways that our conscious selves aren't appreciating. So this modern quest moved forward, and, in the 19th and 20th centuries, we were thrilled by it, and we've been addicted to it, and now we're finding ourselves addicted to all kinds of unintended consequences that we never imagined in the first place. And we see that in scientism. We've tried to employ the scientific method in nearly everything to see how far it could reach. And obviously in the hard sciences, it reached far. But psychology, sociology, medicine, what does it mean to try to study yourself? Can you watch yourself watching yourself? And this gets into the point that we can't take ourselves out of the equation. And so we see this when, for example, Scott Adams is one of my favorite guys, because he can literally tell you, we have a very poor handle on reality. And then he tells us how to improve our handle on reality, and we believe him. And then he tells us what his getting a better handle on reality. Oh, Windows, get out of here. Windows interrupted. I hate those little notifications. I thought I had them turned off. We try and get a handle on, what this means in terms of reality, but we can't take ourselves out of it. We can't, we can take ourselves out of it, and we do it via death. And there's something to that there. And, a lot of people mention Buddhism. Buddhism, in a sense, tries to address that. And I think that's part of the reason there's a Western, I'm going to call it an infatuation with Buddhism, because most of the people that I see talking about Buddhism, if you read, even just the bare nub of what Buddhism comes out of, I see people want it, on one hand, they want to be Buddhist. On the other hand, they want to make their life pleasurable and glorious. And I think, what about that attachment thing? Did you just jump over the attachment thing? And it's not completely unlike Christians who, want to have their best life now. And you might say, did you miss that carrying the cross thing? Or did you just figure you'd skip over that part? Because there's something really central in that cruciform following that if you jump over, it means you kind of don't make it go away. Because the truth about reality that both Buddhism and Christianity recognizes is that life is suffering. And both Buddhism and Christianity offer different answers about how to engage that reality. And I think those two are actually quite different answers. Buddhism, generally speaking, this is a gross simplification, offers detachment. Christianity, in a sense, offers voluntary sacrifice of a particular kind that is not masochistic. So, but the point here is, okay, we're doing science. We're doing science. And this again gets back to this diagram, that we're doing science. We're doing science to climb up a hierarchy. We're doing science, but the science we're doing is governed by stories. And so it's not unusual to see that in postmodernity, story is governing, because story always governs, even though the postmodernists say, oh, we ought to be skeptical about these grand narratives. Well, there's your grand narrative you're being skeptical about, but you can't pull it off, just like Scott Adams has difficulty pulling off his skepticism. And this is where Jordan Peterson's life, instead of a space for objects being a forum for action, this is why it's very hard to be skeptical, because if you want to live, you're going to have limits on your skepticism. And the rider on the elephant will say, I'm skeptical. And the elephant says, go ahead. I never listen to anything you say anyway, or very little. Because if you start doing stuff that starts bugging my elephant brain, I'll make life very hard for you very quickly. So I think postmodernity is a lie or a bust. Now, I want to be careful with that, because these labels are very big, and because I think postmodernity has a real point, and it exposes a lot of the stuff that the other groups don't want to see. Most systems do that, if we can call postmodernity a system. I don't even quite know how to describe what postmodernity is, because it's broken up into many different things. Is it a mood? Is it a posture? Is it a habit? Is it a process? But it's made some terrifically incisive comments and observations, but it bears the same problem that Scott Adams bears, is that I am postmodern, and the only way to not believe my narrative is to not have a narrative. So then we're back into the conversation about Buddhism. It has the same problem, modern problem, of conveniently forgetting the subject. I supposedly can't know anything, but I still want, and will use what I can to get it. And so, if I figure out this handy tool that says, well, all these narratives are a crock, and if we get cynical enough, we can dismiss everything, but the thing we're not dismissing is ourselves. And in a sense, this brings me to Kierkegaard, with why can't I think of that? His piece about despair, where the despairing man commits suicide only to discover it didn't work, and that even via suicide, he didn't get rid of himself. And that's a really powerful piece that Kierkegaard wrote. And why can't I think of it? Someone in the comment section will pull it up. But the despairing man discovers, even suicide won't end his despair. He brought his despair into the next world. Now, obviously, if you're a modernist, you say, well, I don't believe that. Oh, okay, well, give it a shot. You'll see. Or maybe you won't, because there's the unhappy nature of that. If you commit suicide in order to test a hypothesis and you're right, you'll never know, because you're just gone. And so then you have the question that Peterson always cycles around to with respect to the Columbine kids. Is it better to be gone or here and suffer? Well, there's the question. And which leads postmodernity just susceptible to incredible projection. And and that's, I think, part of what we're seeing happening in our culture now. Eschatology still rules. Here are two options. Be slave to your appetites and waste your life. At our Jordan Peterson meetup, I said, if you read C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters, which is a story about two devils basically conspiring to say, you want to feast on humans for eternity? Well, this is how you do it. Give them a comfortable life where it's just, you're filled with your amusements, boom, 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 dead, where you never accomplish anything. And in some senses, this whole Jordan Peterson thing is addressing that by saying, Y'all are wasting your life in your mother's basements with porn and video games covered in Cheetos dust. Get up and do something in the world. And suddenly we realize when we're doing something in the world, we have more meaning and it feels better and we live longer and it's a lot more fun than wasting your life in front of a computer screen. Here I said in front of a computer screen. And so you attempt to apply reason by setting goals, and you attempt to get a hold of yourself, and you do all of this and you clean your room. But then you have the question, what are you aiming for? And Peterson gives some pretty general advice. Make yourself as good as you can be and make the world as good as it can get. But what is good? And I think, I did 2 videos on the Ben Shapiro interview. And I think the best part of that interview was, 25 or 30 minutes or so when Peterson starts talking about Piaget and how we can validate values when I play a game and everybody in the game, I'm reading the emotions of everyone in the game and they want to keep playing the game. So, well, okay, then we're playing the game, boom, 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 boom. And again, watch the Jordan Peterson video on boys. There's an interesting segment in that video too about, way that maybe computer games versus real games in real life. But that doesn't finally address eschatology about what is good. We say, well, we're justified by what is good. And I think to a degree, certainly, we can find what is better. But there are many, many stories in all of human history where people were engaging in games that everyone was having a good time. But we, from another perspective, look at and say, that was a waste of time. And so, well, the eschatological, the telos, what is the chief end of man? Shorter Westminster Confession, to love God and enjoy him forever. This telos, there's always a telos if there's going to have meaning. And here's the challenge with Jordan Peterson's agnosticism. And this has always been the challenge in talking with skeptics. Well, I experience meaning now. Good for you. This gets into, again, we're material creatures living in process. So you have that connection being drawn out. And, gosh, I wish I could illustrate this better. You have this connection that's being drawn out. And in the moment, I feel wonderful. Well, what if I could ensure that in every moment, X plus 1, I would always have a delightful experience? Well, now we're knocking on the door of Brave New World. And that's what that novel is about. We're going to breed into everyone the expectations so that their chaos, order, satisfaction matrix is optimized for everyone. And, Huxley basically looks at that and says, is it going to work? Is it going to work? You're going to have to, you're going to transcend above it? Well, here we are. So actually, Thursday is Ascension Day. And as I mentioned, my friend Eric and I were having a feverish, not a debate because we agree on so much, but a feverish Twitter conversation about Ascension Day, and it's being dropped. And what does that mean? Well, Jesus, so I'm preaching on that this week, and so again, my sermon's rumbling around in my head. It's not Friday, so you don't get the rough draft yet. But Jesus in Matthew basically says, sets the stage, sets the telos. It says, make disciples out of every nation. And, well, what are disciples? Disciples are followers of Jesus. Well, what does Jesus teach? And now we're, into that conversation. So Jesus ascends. Well, what does that mean? Means he goes up. Well, what does that mean? Well, now we're into, Jonathan Peugeot territory. And if your pastor can't talk to you about why up and why this is connected, ask your pastor to think about it. I'm not going to tell you to leave your church if you go to a church. But this is because the smart skeptics will say, yeah, Jesus flies. What's that about? Because, we went up into space and we didn't see heaven. So, what happens to your Genesis representation? So it's Thursday and people aren't accustomed to going to church on Thursday. Probably all the Orthodox are working on their. So if you're Orthodox, tell me what you're doing this week. You're probably in church all week. Because if Protestants spend 1 hour, the Orthodox spend 3 or 10 or 12. And can you believe it unless you spend that much time in it? And what does believing then look like? And I mean, there's no end to these questions. So yeah, 1 year into Jordan Peterson, and my motivational watchers that sent me here, I am by no means dissatisfied with where they sent me or what I've learned this year. And again, I guess the two biggest things were, number one, letting Jordan Peterson into my noodle, and number two, starting the YouTube channel where all of you all in the comment section and your letters and notes to me and the meetups, now you all are in my noodle. So this constructed self has really changed throughout this year. And so where will I be next year? Now we're kind of into the Truman Show. So this wasn't too long. Maybe somebody will watch it. Thanks for watching.